Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Samech Aleph Amud Beis, starting with Samech Aleph Amud Aleph at the new Mishnah on the bottom. Until now we've been speaking about that when a person is shoyves in a certain city, so he has the ability to walk freely within the entire city and counts only his 2,000 amos from the borders of that city. We had mentioned also the Shita of the Chachamim, that when a person is going to also put his Eruv in a city, then he will also then consider the entire city to be only a Dalet Amos. Dahainu, he can then walk freely within the entire city, and then count the 2,000 Amos from the borders of that city. When a person is moeded, when he measures his 2,000 Amos, and it's going to be beyond the city, then he will then be able to then go beyond that city, continuing his counting of 2,000 amos. In other words, the entire city, no matter how large that space is, if he then counts beyond 2,000 amos and gets to the end of that city, then the entire city is considered to be 4 amos, and he begins counting then from where he left off from the beginning of that city. However, if he's moeded, he's measuring his 2,000 amos, and he finds himself in the middle of the city at the end of the 2,000 amos, then he has to stop in his tracks. He cannot go further, and therefore he only has the 2,000 amos that he counted. Says the Mishnah, not only the Shita of the Chacham, but the dissenting opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Anshe ir gedoyla mahalchin es kol ir ketana. The Anshe ir gedoyla, they can traverse the entire city that is an Ir Ketana, that is next to it. Let's say it's 500 amos away. However, and the Mishnah goes on to say, Ve'anshe Ir Ketan mahalchi es kol Ir gedoyla. And also, the small city, the Ir Ketana, could also traverse the entire Ir gedoyla. Explains the Mishnah. Keitzad. Misha haya bi'ir gedoyla v'nosan es eruvoi bi'ir ketana. A person in the big city places his eruv in the small city. Bi'ir ketana v'nosan es eruv bi'ir gedoyla, or in the opposite direction. The ir ketana places an eruv in the ir gedoyla. Well, in both scenarios, the Mishnah says mahalich es kula v'chutzula al paimama. He can then go within, he can traverse the entire city, freely he can walk within the city, and begin counting his 2,000 amos from the borders of the city. Rabbi Akiva argues, and he says, Ein lo ela b'mokom eruvoy al payim amo. If he's going to place his eruv in the middle of the city, he will only have 2,000 amos from where that eruv is placed. Omolehem Rabbi Akiva now tries to prove his point to the Chachamim. Do you not agree with me that a person places his eruv in a cave? That he'll only have 2,000 amos from where he places his eruv, and even though a cave is a closed area, it's like a city, nonetheless he'll only have 2,000 amos from the place that he places the eruv, and not like you're suggesting that he would have to be able to walk throughout the entire Ma'ara and only count 2,000 amos from the entrance of the Ma'ara. Omruloi, the sages said back to Rabbi Akiva, Masai, when is this so that when a person places an Eruv in the Ma'ara, he only has 1,000 amos from where he places the Eruv? That's Bizman She'ein Ba Diurin. That's when there's no residence in that cave. Aval Yesh Ba Diurin. But if there are residents that live in that cave, then you can go ahead and walk freely within the cave and count 2,000 amos from the entrance of that cave. Nimtza kal toicha me'al gabo. It comes out that where it's kal, it's mekil, the inside, then that which is above it, because if you are outside of the cave, then you can only go 2,000 amos from where you place the eruv. But in the scenario where there are residents, if you placed the eruv inside of the cave, not only can you walk freely within the entire cave, no matter how large the cave may be, you then have an additional 2,000 amos from the entrance of the cave. The Mishnah continues, V'la moeded in regards to somebody who is measuring, he's counting 2,000 amos before Shabbos enters. And it says, She'omru, the sages mentioned, Noistin alpaim amo, we will give him 2,000 amos. She'afilu soiv midoso kala b'maro, since when he then measures his steps, he gets to then the middle of the ma'aro, then even if he got to the end of the ma'aro, then it's kala b'maro. If he gets to the end of 2,000 steps in the middle of the ma'aro, then there he then only has 2,000 amos. It's like a person who is kole, he finishes his steps in the middle of the city. Then he only has 2,000 amos. So the sages agree in such a scenario that, of course, when you end up in the middle of the city or in the middle of the cave, then you only have 2,000 amos from where you left off, and therefore where you got to, that then is the end of your 2,000 amos. You cannot go further. Says the Gemara in Daf Samech Aleph Amud Beis at the very top. Omar Rabbi Yehuda, Omar Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda said the name of Shmuel. Shovas bi'ir chareva, of a person who was koine shvisa. That means on the onset of Shabbos he was koine shvisi in the Ir Chareva. And Ir Chareva is a city of ruins. It still has walls that are standing, but nobody is living there. L'rabbonen mahalech es kula v'chutzu lo alpaim amo. According to the Chachamim, you can go ahead and traverse, you can walk within the entire Ir Chareva, and then you can count your 2,000 amos from the outside, from the borders. Hiniach es eruvoi, but if you placed an eruv inside, and as you weren't there presently, but you instead placed an eruv inside to be kone your shvisa, then be'ir chareva ein loy b'makom eruvoi elo apayim amo. If you place an eruv inside of an ir chareva, then you can only then go 2,000 amos from where that eruv was placed. In other words, this is the sheet of the Rabbanon, that the Rabbanon say that when you're shoyves, even in a makom chareva, you'll have 2,000 amos from outside, from the walls of the borders of the chareva, of the ear. Over here, also, the Rabbanon say that in this case, since you put your eruv in the ir chareva, so since it's an ir chareva where there's no people who are residents in this place, so therefore you can only have the 2,000 amos when you within the place where you place the eruv. Rabbi Elazar argues on that which Rabbi Yehuda just said in the name of Shmuel. Echad shovas ve'echad heiniach. Whether you were there from the onset of Shabbos or you placed your eruv there in the ir chareva, mahalich es kulo v'chutzo lo alpaim amo. He says, without distinction, he says, both when you're shoyves as well as yeheniach, he says you can also walk freely within the entire ir chareva and count your 2,000 amos from the walls, from the borders of that ir. Meisvei Omar Lohem, Rabbi Akiva will bring a kasha on the shita of Rabbi Elazar from our Mishnah. After all, Rabbi Akiva turned to the Chachamim and he's then tried to prove to them as follows. Iatem moidim li benoisin es eruva memaro. Would you not agree with me that when a person places his eruv in the maro, in the cave, she'ein lo mimakom eruva ela alpaim amo, that he only has 2,000 amos from the place where he put the eruv? And therefore you see indeed that it doesn't help to put an eruv in a place other than the fact that you'll get the 2,000 amos from where that place is. But you're not going to get more than that. Omru loy, the sages said back to Rabbi Akiva, there's a fundamental difference between putting your eruv in a city or putting your eruv in a ma'aro. When is this so that you will not have then the entire city plus the 2,000 amos outside of it? That's because there is no diurin. In a ma'aro, there's no diurin. There's no residence there. But So we see, therefore, that the Chacham agree when there are no diurin, then they agree that you do not have more than 2,000 amos outside of the city. That they agree. So we see it's a kasha. You see that Rabbi Elazar is saying that we don't make a distinction whether you are shovas or meiniach and eruv in an ir chareva. Now, presumably an ir chareva is ein lo diurin. So that's against what our Mishnah is saying the Chachamim hold. Answers the Gemara, my ein ba diurin. What's meant when it says ein ba diurin? Eina ru'uya ladira. It means that it's not fitting for dira. But if it's fitting for dira because these walls of the ruin are still up, therefore the Chachamim would hold that you would have 2,000 not only walk the entire area of the Ir Chareva, but you can also count 2,000 amos then from the walls of the Ir Chareva, from the borders. Toshma, the Gemara now wants to bring another proof against Rabbi Elazar. Shovaz bi'ir. If a person dwells, he begins the Shabbos in a city to become a shvisa, afilu hi gedola ba'antuchya, even if it's an ear that's as big as Antuchya. B'ma'ara afilu hi b'ma'aros tzidkio melech Yehuda. If it's even in a Mara cave as big as the cave of Tzidkiah, where they dug throughout underneath Yerushalayim in order to then have him escape. Mahalech es kulo v'chutzula alpaim amo. It says over there that he can mahalech, he can go the entire area, and outside of it 2,000 amo. Kitani ir dumya damaro. So now the Gemara wants to make its proof and make it and say that since ir is comparable to ma'ara, it's compared to a ma'ara. In which way? Ma'ara chareva af ir chareva. We're talking about just as the ma'ara is chareva, so too the city is also chareva. We're talking about a city of ruins, and still we're talking about vishovas in avahiniach loy. Here the Bryce is talking about only when he's shovas. Then we say he has not only the entire area plus 2,000 amos from outside. But if it's not that way, because we're talking about where he's hiniach es ha'eruv, then he wouldn't have other than the 2,000 amos within the place where he placed the eruv. Mani, who is the author? Ileima, the Gemara continues, Rabbi Akiva. If you want to say that this is authored by Rabbi Akiva, my area, chareva fili shivanami. Why mention that it's chareva, even if it was something that was settled in? Even then, Rabbi Akiva said that you don't have more than the 2,000 amos from the place that you put the eruv. Ella, it must be lav rabbonon v'taima deshavas in avahiniach loy. And here the Gemara concludes its proof that we see from here that only when you're shavas, then you then have not only the entire city but 2,000 amos outside. But if it was hiniach eruv, then not. So kasha clearly on Rabbi Elazar. Says the Gemara, lo teima ir dumya demara. Don't learn from this brisa that the ear is compared to a ma'ara, and therefore say that just like the ma'ara is that which is chareva, so too the ear is chareva. No. Ela ein ma'ara dumya the ear. Go the other way around and say that the ma'ara is compared to the city. In which way? Ma'ir yeshiva af ma'ar yeshiva. Just like the ear is an ear, talking about an ear that is settled, that's a typical city. So too, the ma'ara that we're speaking about is a ma'ara that is settled. Rabbi Akiva, and indeed it's Rabbi Akiva. The Omar ein loy makom eruva ela alpaim amo uveshovas moide. He says that when it comes to such a scenario, if it was putting an eruv in such a place, obviously you don't have more than the 2,000 amos from its place. But if you're shovas, you began your Shabbos in such a place, then even Rabbi Akiva would agree that you would have not only the 2,000, the whole area, but plus 2,000 amos from the outside of the borders. I asked the Gemara, if you're going to explain it this way, that you're going to say that it's indeed the ma'ara is dumya to ear, and just like the ear is miyushav, it's settled, so too the ma'ara is settled, and then we can explain it according to Rabbi Akiva. Ask the Gemara, v'ho ma'ara tzidkiya ketani. Here we're talking about the ma'ara of tzidkiya. That is not settled. That's chareva. Maybe once upon a time it was, but now it's certainly not. Says the Gemara, Kimara Tzidkiya v'lo Kimara Tzidkiya. It's dumya, it's similar to Tzidkiya's cave, and it's also not similar to Tzidkiya's cave. In what way do we want to bring it that it's similar to Tzidkiya's cave? Kimara Tzidkiya Gedola, and that is very large. But it's not like the Ma'ar of Tzidkiyahu, because there it's talking about that it was Miyusha, but over here it's Chareva. Meaning what? That the Tzidkiyahu, the cave of Tzidkiyahu is Chareva, whereas we're talking about a cave that is Dumya Te'ir, that is Miyusha, that is settled. The Gemara now brings, in regards to putting an Erev Techumin, where in the city did they put it? Mar Yehuda Ashkechin Hu Lebei Mivrachta. Mar Yehuda, he found the people of Mavrachta, of the city of Mavrachta, they call Moisvei Eruvayu Bebei Kenishta Debei Agoivar, that they placed their Eruv, they're talking about an Eruv Techumin, inside of the area of the shul, in the Bei Agoivar, and the person named Bei Agoivar in that place, that's that shul. So certainly the shul was included in the confines, in the 2,000 amos of the city of Mavrachta. But they weren't particular in where in the shul they would place the Eruv. Now the shul was a very large building, but they didn't make any difference to where in the shul, where in the building would they put the Eruv, whether it was on the furthest east part or the furthest west part. It didn't make a difference to them. Omar Lahu, so he said to them, this is Mar Yehuda, Govu Bey, he said to them, move, Beit Tfei, Ki Hechi Delishtari Lechu Tfei. Go ahead and move further. Let's say they were on the far end west, move to the far end east, to then permit you to then be able to then walk even further. In other words, he was concerned for the Shita of Rabbi Akiva, because he held that you only had 2,000 amos from the place where you put the Eruv. Omar Le Rava turns to Mar Yehuda and he says, Palgo, you dissenting one, you contentious person, he said, Be'eruvin, less the chash lo Rabbi Akiva. In regards to Eruvin, since Eruvin is the Rabbanon, and where we go, the kula, when it comes to the halachas of Eruvin, then we're not chash for the shita of Rabbi Akiva, and therefore you have the ability to then carry wherever you want to walk wherever you want within the entire ear, plus the 2,000 amos outside of the ear. Hadron aloch ketzad ma'abrin.